Hello, everyone. I'm Varsha Gandikotana-Littler from the Cabinet of the Progressive International. Welcome to our special session today, convened by the Progressive International's WIRE. As an international, we have three main pillars: movement, where we see progressive activists from around the world join us to form a united force; blueprint, which convenes activists, thinkers, and practitioners to produce policy blueprints and principles for critical issues; and lastly, we have the WIRE International, which is a new global project to challenge the corporate stranglehold over the means of media production by building an international network of left-wing publications to exchange content and build collective power. From the WIRE International, we've convened today's session to take on the question of internationalism in the media. With platforms like Facebook and Google slowly taking over the role of bringing news to households and individuals, we're beginning to see dangerous trends in which stories are actually reported, which voices are heard, and which perspectives are shut out from the view. On the other hand, we see corporate media consolidation. We all know of the Rupert Murdochs of the world, but also newer players like Amazon's Jeff Bezos owning one of the United States' most influential newspapers. And as right-wing nationalism sort of surges around the world, corporate media outlets have repeatedly also kneecapped progressive challengers. There are, of course, many incredible progressive publications managing to put out critical news and analysis despite these overwhelming forces. But they're distributed across the world and lack the funding to embed reporters around the world with the knowledge of local context. So what can we do as progressive forces? How can we mobilize across borders? We organize. And this is why the Progressive International launched The Wire, a coalition of leading publications from around the world to exchange content and build an alternative, a left-wing alternative to mainstream media. Every day, The Wire translates stories, essays, statements from members and partner publications. And I'm so excited to be joined today by four of these partners, friends, stellar journalists in their own right, who are joining us from four different parts of the world as we organize towards this internationalist project. If I could briefly introduce each of them, we have Sean Jacobs from Africa as a Country. Sean is founder and editor of Africa as a Country, which is a site of opinion analysis and new writing. He is an associate professor of international affairs at the New School in New York City. He's in New York right now and calling in from there, but originally from Cape Town in South Africa. Welcome, Sean. Our second guest is Len Olea from the Bulatlat in the Philippines. Len is the managing editor of the Bulatlat, the longest-running online media outfit in the Philippines. She's been covering human rights issues and marginalized sectors in the country for the past 18 years. Welcome again to you, Len. Our third guest is Dennis Rogatyuk, who's the international editor of El Ciudadano newspaper and media platform, as well as the international editor of Jacobin America Latina and an associate editor with the French media platform Le Vent se lève. Dennis is currently based in Melbourne. And lastly, our fourth guest is Miguel Mora of Contexto y Acción, a left-wing independent Spanish online publication founded in 2015 that offers long-form news analysis and opinion. Miguel is also an award-winning journalist who's done some excellent investigative work in different parts of the world. I'm so happy to be joined by these four friends and guests of the Progressive International. And I want to invite each of our speakers to share with our audience the challenges that progressive media faces both globally and in your specific regions and contexts. As you engage with the Progressive International's WIRE, how do you see internationalism evolve in the media landscape? I want to start with you, Sean. You've talked before about how you wanted Africa as a Country, your publication, to not just intervene in debates about Africa, but also to amplify voices that are otherwise marginalized, especially Africa's left traditions and social movements. So I want to turn it over to you to ask, how have things changed from when you began this project to now, both in the media landscape in Africa, but also independent media more broadly? The floor is yours.
Yeah. So Africa as a Country, I actually have some slides. If it's useful, I could show them to help explain this process and what has happened to us. So let me do that quickly. So Africa as a Country, basically, it's a website that was started in 2009. So it's about 11 years old now. And essentially, it started out trying to react to the kind of images that appeared about Africa, in particularly North American media. These images, characterizations were anti-intellectual, they were decontextualized, and in most of these Africans never had a voice. And so over time, because social media began to do some of that work, we didn't have to do that kind of reacting in real time to some of the bad coverage about Africa. And so we could move on to something else, which is that by at least about 4 or 5 years ago, we could present people with opinions and analysis by Africans themselves. And particularly these could be opinions and analysis with a left-wing slant. Because one of the problems with reacting to negative stereotypes about Africa is that what you had was people reacted by presenting a sort of Africa that is ready for capitalist development, for capitalist exploitation. And we were trying to argue that there is a different future for Africa, and based on kind of our own experiences, Africans have experimented with other kinds of models that are more equitable, more humane in how getting ahead. I think the other thing that guides Africa as a country is then to move away from reactionary, generalized conceptions of politics, and to come more with specificity and to treat Africa as a real place. The final thing that sort of guides our work is we're interested in not being, what we try to do is to see ourselves all the time as outsiders, because if we feel always that if we get co-opted, then we would do the work of power, and that's not who we're trying to do the work for. We grew from like a small, really small website that had a very niche audience to the point where now we are very active on like a number of social media platforms. We're very active on Twitter, over 100,000 followers. We have we're very active Facebook. Our site does really well. And then more recently, we've looked at other ways of communicating with this audience. We do a live stream show that we broadcast on these multiple formats, and we distribute a newsletter once a week to our subscribers, 12,000 of them. Now, historically, where does this come from? It's not like Africans discovered opinion the other day. There's a long history since the beginning of independence in Africa at the end of the 1950s, beginning of the 1960s, where intellectuals began to say, well, what are we thinking about the future of our continent? And there's a number of magazines that played, for me especially, a role in kind of forming my identity online. One is this magazine called Transition, which came out of Uganda in the early 1960s. And anyone you could think of, Wally Soyinka, Louis Nkosi, Chinua Achebe, Ale Mazrui, all these people, Nadine Gordimer, published in this magazine. Beyond that, specific to South Africa, I come from a very kind of left-wing tradition, populist tradition of the 1980s. And in South Africa, despite repression, there was a very vibrant magazine, opinion, culture, public intellectual culture, particularly this magazine called Staffwriter, which was a literary magazine, but did a lot of politics. Secondly, there was, in the late 1980s, something called the alternative media. This is magazines like the Mail and Guardian. Well, it was a weekly mail that became the Mail and Guardian, the New Nation, and in particular this one called Freya Weekblad, which published in Afrikaans, which most people don't know is not a white language, but it's actually a Creole language, and the majority of the speakers of that language are Black. But what these magazines did was they operated independently. They created a new model for journalism, one that was not beholden to corporate interests. They did not belong to major media companies, but they were mostly done by disaffected journalists, most of them left-wing journalists. And then finally, South Africa also had a tradition of kind of the equivalent of The Nation or The Progressive, these kind of left opinion magazines. And for me, the most influential one was one called Work in Progress, started by a group of trade unionists. And that's a tradition from which we work. And finally, I also worked for something called Chimurenga, which is a magazine out of Cape Town, a Pan-African magazine out of Cape Town. And I was part of the beginnings of that magazine. So this is the kind of connection where we come from. I would end one last thing, a couple of quick other hits. One is we're really aware that the African audience has moved away from print. A lot of people are moving online. This is a tweet done by a group of activists who were organizing between 2015 and 2017 around outsourcing, the privatization of universities, free public higher education, and also confronting South Africa's colonial history. And what's interesting is how they foregrounded the role of the internet in these struggles. Secondly, we've noticed that even though people talk about a digital divide in Africa, what's happened is that a lot of young Africans move online, and that most people get their information through their phones. So like this is readership statistics for our own website. We find that most of our readers are mobile. We've also noticed that younger Africans have gone online. They're starting other websites. One of the websites, which is also on the wire, that we partner with, is called The Elephant, out of Kenya, out of Nairobi in Kenya, in East Africa. This is another one called African Feminism. I think the benefit that I find from working with the wire is translation. We do some translation, but we do it like this is in Swahili. This is about hospital privatization. But working with the wire, it is exposing us to a whole range of publications that we wouldn't have nevertheless work with. And the one thing that I really would like to see, where I'm hoping the wire can go, and we would be happy to work with you. I mean, this is a new area for us, is around film. I think what is clear is that most people now communicate visually, and we're trying to adjust to that, and that means making explainers. That's something, and I'd be curious to see what the wire is going to do around explainers. And then finally, we've done two other things. We've created a funding source using funding that we've got from some foundations to fund 10 young journalists to produce articles for us, and we've appointed them as fellows. We provide them with a couple of $1,000 every year, and then also we've gone by producing this live stream. So my question then at the end, maybe I should stop here, is to say what I would like to see moving forward, and where I could see something interesting with the wire is around doing work, more visual media. I think that's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much for that, Sean, for both very illuminating history of progressive media in multiple countries in Africa, but also leaving us with those interesting questions, which I'm hoping we'll get to discuss in the session today. I'll turn now to Len, who's joining us from the Philippines. Len, you've repeatedly spoken up against the attacks on press freedom in the Philippines, and especially the infamous killings of journalists that we're all now unfortunately familiar with. I want to give you the floor to learn about how Bulatlat operates under these conditions, and importantly, what does media resistance look like today in the Philippines?
Yes, you're right, Varsha. The Philippine media is under attack, especially under the Duterte administration. Bulatlat, for one, has been labeled as a so-called enemy of the state and repeatedly tagged as the so-called Communist Front for bringing the truth to the public. For nearly 20 years, Bulatlat has been telling the truth from the perspective of the farmers, workers, indigenous peoples, urban poor, and other ordinary folk. Unfair labor practices, impacts of large-scale mining on indigenous peoples and farmers' communities, demolition of shanties to pave the way for so-called development projects, landlessness, and feudal exploitation of farmers are but some of the decades-long problems that are considered taboo by the dominant media companies, which are largely controlled by big business interests. Because of its fearless journalism, Bulatlat has been subjected to various forms of attack. Not only we were labeled as terrorists by the powers that be, some of our colleagues have been charged with trumped up charges, such as our correspondents in other parts of the country. And despite the risk, we continue our work because we know that telling the truth from the perspective of the marginalized and oppressed contributes to the struggle of the Filipino people for social justice. As of now, Bulatlat has been striving on volunteers and donors, and somehow the financial limitations hinder us from pursuing stories that require expenses beyond our modest budget. But we keep on going because we know that telling the truth is our contribution to genuine change in the Philippines. And with more than 10 million overseas Filipinos in different parts of the country, Bulatlat has gained readership in regions outside of Asia. Foreign scholars and progressives interested in Philippine affairs also regularly visit the website. Still, we see the need to expand our audience overseas, especially in these trying times. Thus, when Wire invited Bulatlat to be a partner, we did not have second thoughts of joining. Besides the benefit of getting a wider reach, we look forward to the possibility of collaboration, such as perhaps doing cross-border stories. With foreign aid agencies and transnational corporations operating in the Philippines, the issues of the vulnerable are undeniably global. The Lumad of Mindanao, displaced by Anglo-Swiss mining firm, for example, need to reach out to the citizens of those countries to ask them to exert pressure for these companies to pull out from their communities. The American people need to know that their taxes are being used to fund the bloody counterinsurgency program of the Duterte administration. The successive typhoons here have inundated many parts of Luzon, the biggest island, and projects with international funding have to be made to account for contributing to these disasters. We think that internationalism is the way to go because we need to build solidarity among us as progressive journalists and among our people who deserve a better future.
Thank you so much, Len. I think you make some very important points, especially on things like international funding. I think it brings up the question for us, all of us interested in internationalism, about how we might be able to implicate each other in subjugation that happens at a distance. Thank you for that. I'm hoping we can return to some of the more specific arguments that you brought up in your speech today. I want to turn now to Dennis. Dennis, you've been part of the independent media landscape for quite some time now, well over 7 years. And of course, alternate publications play a very critical role as offering that alternate perspective, especially in contexts where national mainstream media crowds out left-wing analysis. But at the same time, just as Len pointed out, resources are limited. And in terms of being able to reach new audiences, or there's language barriers, there are many restraints. So I want to turn to you to ask how you see alternative publications breaking through national borders and where there might be openings for internationalism from where you're standing. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that. First of all, much like Sean, I also prepared a short PowerPoint slide, which I hope can actually help me to answer that question and any other questions that will be there for El Ciudadano. I'm just going to try and share this. Excellent. Now, apologies that the presentation will actually be in Spanish, because we normally do this with our partners across Latin America and Spain, but I will translate whatever I can. So El Ciudadano started off as an independent media project in south of Chile. It was founded by Bruno Sommer Catalan, initially as a kind of a libertarian socialist media platform that after 15 years actually grew to become one of the largest media platforms in Chile, as well as one of the largest progressive media platforms across Latin America. And it did that specifically through several ways. Most importantly, it's one of the main areas of growth for El Ciudadano was understanding understanding the functioning of the algorithms in social media, especially the algorithm in Facebook, which is the main platform for El Ciudadano, which currently has 4.3 million followers in Facebook. And the majority of that growth took place around the early 2010s, going up to 2017 and 2018, on the back of a very robust kind of model of producing audiovisual materials. Well, some of them are maybe not so political, while others have been kind of a combination of politics and entertainment. But at the same time, also not forgetting our roots as a progressive outlet, as an independent outlet, and also we also engaged in several projects in Chile and in other countries. One of the most well, fascinating ones, at least the ones
Dennis, sorry to interrupt you, but do you think you could put your presentation in slideshow mode? There's an option right up top.
Oh, yes, sorry. One of the most fascinating, as I was saying, one of the most fascinating projects that El Ciudadano conducted in the last several years was a campaign called Mar para Todos, which involved the production of reports, of videos, of interviews, just a mass media campaign to with regards to the sea access of our sister nation of Bolivia, which interestingly enough has generated quite a lot of negative feedback against us on the part of both the right-wing political forces and also the private media, as the issue of the sea access to Bolivia has traditionally been perceived as being extremely negative in Chile. And this was one of the first times that a Chilean outlet actually took the stand on the side of Bolivia, and received quite a massive, negative feedback from that. But we received enormous support and appreciation on the part of our Bolivian brothers and sisters, and on the part of on the part of President Evo Morales during that time. Furthermore, one of the other projects that El Ciudadano has been supporting throughout these years has, of course, been the citizens' revolution in Ecuador and other progressive progressive movements, other progressive governments in the region. We've also established an office in Caracas, in Venezuela, in order to be able to better cover the situation in the country, and to really go beyond the headlines presented in the private media of the current media war that has been waged against the Bolivarian revolution, against the Venezuelan government, and really presenting the reality of the situation, presenting the reality of the U.S. intervention, U.S. embargo in the country. So since then, we've maintained offices in Santiago de Chile, in Caracas, as well as international correspondents all over the world, and we've produced other kinds of material as well, such as so-called political books or polit books, and of course we also produce a monthly physical newspaper in Chile, featuring the most either the most prominent interviews that we did there, such as the one we did with Rafael Correa last year. This is the copy that you see that we published in May last year, or the headlines of the most important events. The last 6 months, El Ciudadano has been involved very heavily in with regards to the process of the Constituent Assembly in the country, and during last year's mass protests, mass uprising in October of that year, El Ciudadano was one of the main independent media outlets on the ground, covering and documenting the repression that was conducted by the Chilean state security forces, Carabineros, against student activists, against trade union activists, against the popular movement there. And as a result, El Ciudadano itself, the platform, has suffered immensely in terms of both the online attacks that we received on our website and on our social media platform. But that has not deterred us. As I said, the reach which we which we have had throughout this time has been has still been quite deep across Chile and across the world, as on a daily basis, El Ciudadano is able to reach up to 5 million people across the world, all of which is organic. So we do not pay for any of that reach there. Sorry, just one sec. With regards to with regards to the question, with regards to the question that you asked, Russia, it has become one of the key challenges for us has of course become the issue of financing and the issue of actually maintaining our media platforms. And this is where we realize in El Ciudadano is that we, as independent media platforms and journalists, are currently living under the tyranny of the algorithm. The algorithm that exists in Facebook, in Twitter, in the search engines. And as you mentioned earlier at the start of the talk, is that large corporations, especially like Google, who currently possess who possess at the very least for the moment the hegemony over the way in which we are able to to find news across the world. They recognize that outlets like ours are a threat and a danger to them, and we've been seeing more and more recently this year and last year a large number of our revenues being cut down at the El Ciudadano platform, both through the monetization and Facebook, in the other search engines, through our website, advertisements. So it has certainly been becoming more of a challenge in being able to sustain ourselves better. But this is where I believe the international solidarity really comes in, as this is the moment where we need to start seeking for the support of our friends, of our comrades, of our readers, so people who are engaged with us, who engage with us on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and those who also appreciate our work and would also be able to finance us. So collective fundraising efforts, I think, would be crucial for our survival and for our growth in the future. And I believe this is also something which the Wire can be a great platform for, a great platform for all of us to come together, but also for our readers to come together and be able to help keep us going. I'm not sure how much time I have left, as there was one other major project which El Ciudadano has been conducting precisely with regards to seeing how we can break the corporate media monopoly. Yeah. Am I right on time?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, excellent. The other major project which El Ciudadano has been engaged in, and I'm just going to share my screen once again to demonstrate it, is called Red Medial, which is meant to be a one hand side is meant, in terms of the actual form that it takes, it is a website, but more importantly, it acts as a kind of a network for all the different international media outlets across the world. And this project is kind of the brainchild of our founder, Bruno Sommer Catalan, who has been working tirelessly to try to negotiate and include every major and every good quality independent media that he can find across the world. The project, although the project is still in its prototype stage, it nevertheless has already accumulated up to I think 400 media channels on this platform. Essentially, the way it works is any person who either downloads the program or registers with the Red Media service is able to select out of this pool of international medias a certain group of channels to be displayed on their screen at any time. So for myself, for example, I select the channels like Telesur, RT, Hispan TV, El Ciudadano from Latin America, also La Jornada, Democracy Now! From the United States, Grey Zone from the United States, Brasil de Fato from Brazil, Público, as a kind of a customized newsstand, which is meant to be the project is meant to be kind of a first step to the creation of a new media conglomerate as I mentioned, progressive independent outlets from across the world who would be able to, on one hand side, reach greater audiences across the world, but more importantly, be able to reach share the information and share the material across this network of over 1,000 different outlets with a mission similar to their own. And this in particular is one of the main ways which I believe which we can resist the tyranny of algorithm, in that rather than our search for news being dominated by the engine in Google or the engine in Yahoo or in any other outlets controlled by the corporate media, instead, Red Media is meant to be the alternative to that. It's meant to be the future for news search, for news research, and for the sharing of information across networks and among like-minded people as well.
Thank you for that, Dennis. And certainly, yeah, the tyranny of the algorithm is a recurring theme that's been propping up as we talk to journalists world over, right? Just as the digital landscape has democratized media, it's also brought with it greater access to reactionary forces. So I'm hoping we can return to that question in greater detail as well. But as you talk about the clickbait nature of news publications, it's a good transition to I would turn to Miguel, who at Revista Contexto, your motto, as I understand it, Miguel, is proud to be late to the latest news. So I'm curious about kind of the philosophy behind that and how you approach a lot of the critical news and analysis there. And I also want to ask about your experience as an investigative journalist. I think, at least for me personally, it often feels today that we have far too many op-eds and very little actual journalistic reporting. And I understand, a lot of that is in part because of the lack of funding. But I'm curious to hear from you about what are the many different challenges that you see to real journalism on the ground, especially for this internationalist project when we're trying to get critical grassroots perspectives to places where they otherwise wouldn't reach. Over to you. Miguel, I think you're on mute, so if you could unmute yourself and start again. Thank you.
Okay. Hi to everybody. Thank you, Varsha, for your introduction, and thank you to all the panelists for the beautiful the beautiful information you give us. CTXT as short way of saying Contexto, which was a common name that was taken by other magazines in Europe and we couldn't use. So it was an accident. The title of the magazine was an accident, but it wasn't the philosophy. As you said, Barsha, our motto is proud to arrive late to the latest news, or to arrive the latest to the latest news, and that's the editorial philosophy of this little media that was founded in 2014 by 14 journalists that were staying out of some legacy media. El País, I worked for El País for 22 years, and the other founders have worked for El Mundo as well, and other publications in Europe. So it was more or less the time when the crisis decided that the legacy newspapers were going to put out of the newsrooms the most brilliant and courageous journalists to save up some money. So at that time, it was very difficult to write with freedom in El País, for instance, which was already taken by the bank system in Spain, because they made a huge amount of debt of like 5 billion euros. So they couldn't afford to pay that, and then the banks became shareholders of the newspaper. So that crisis added to the crisis of the internet model, which was already based in late hot news and 24-hour news. We thought that we should make something different, and we thought that perhaps we could try to do the New Yorker with a chorizo flavor. I mean, we were in Spain and we were very little, so chorizo is our motto as well. And so we tried to make the New Yorker, and it wasn't easy, because we were only 14, and the New Yorker perhaps have now 3,000 journalists on the roll. But we managed to do what we wanted to do. We wanted to do a side of analysis and of slow journalism. We were inspired as well because by the French quarterlies, or the magazines that they publish in France every week, and it was very difficult at the beginning, because we have no company structure. We were all journalists. We didn't have anybody to manage the company, so we had to work for free for the first 1 year and a half, and then little by little we were adding new little shareholders to the company and new readers, and finally in 2017 we decided that we were going to go for a subscription model. So we began to make subscribers, and now we have like 6,000 subscribers and 5,000 donors, which are more or less 65% of our incomes. As you said, Varsha, we are heading a difficult year this year, because the pandemic has impacted very, very hard on Contexto. We used to organize public events like Feminism Congress we did 2 years ago, with 500 attendants and 55 panelists from all over the world. So that's the way you can go offline and take some money from companies that usually doesn't invest on let's say left-wing journalism. So let me please show you a little bit about the website. It's not quite the New Yorker, but I think you can have a little idea. Here is a motto: orgullosas de llegar tarde a las últimas noticias. And then you have the menu. The menu is like we try to recover all the journalist genders that were going out of the internet media. I mean, like the editorial article weekly, which almost no digital media does. So we try to recover that, and the philosophy is that we are only informing. The international information we do is always done on the field. We don't write about Philippines from Spain or about Germany from Spain, which most of the digital in Spain does, because we think the information has to be done on the field and by people who knows the places. Then we have the Ministerio, which is the culture section, and the crisis ecosocial. This is climate change and social crisis. And then we have a section which is called feminisms. We do lots of interviews. We do a little sports as well, and we gave big importance to the drawings, like the New Yorker does, and try to always have a good drawing every day. So this is more or less the philosophy. We managed to have since the very beginning like 500,000 readers by month, and during these years since 2015 we have made 26 million users, and this is the best number we have. The medium stay of reading is 11 minutes 25. So we have managed to do what we wanted to do. We wanted to do long pieces and long form pieces and slow journalism. So we have the highest media reading in Spain and probably in Europe. I don't know in America how that goes, but that means we have had a lot of readers during these 5 years, and compared to the number of readers, not many subscribers. That is the huge problem we are facing now. It's very difficult to enroll new subscribers to this type of media, and I hope, as Dennis told us before, and that it would be very nice if we manage to make up an international platform that allows people who want to defend independent journalism to share their media and pay for them. So that would be a huge advance for independence and for the freedom of this media. So if we are able to make that happen, I think that would be the future of the progressive media for all of us. That would be easier for us to survive in an environment which is very difficult because we have no institutional help, no enterprises help. So we are seeing that every day we depend more and more in our readers. But as the economic situation is very bad, that support is always in danger. So let's think about it, and let's see if we can help to everybody by doing that. It would be very nice. Thank you, and excuse my English, it is very oxidated, a little bit oxidated.
Thank you, Miguel, for being very articulate in what you call oxidated English, and solidarity, of course, to all of you who are working in very difficult contexts and difficulties of different kinds, while still pushing ahead. And it's pretty sad to see these numbers from some of your publications, but also equally hopeful to look at the number of readers and see the wider audiences that you're reaching every single day. So once again, thank you for the work that you do. I want to turn to Sean with maybe a question about, the conceptualization of Africa as a country, something that you mentioned, and it's of course rings true, right, about how perspectives from the ground, from movements within different countries in Africa don't often get reported in international media. And in fact, even within Africa, a lot of people end up reading Western media. And that's kind of the space that you were entering. But it reminds me of something a friend had said when I was thinking about the differences between anthropology and sociology, about how anthropology was a study of the other and sociology was a study of the self, and that's how it had evolved in the US. But I think there's something similar in journalism, right, where in academia, a lot of the time, people from the global south are expected to study themselves, and you see that in journalism as well, where you're expected to write about yourself. So I want to ask about the flip side of what we've already talked about with Africa as a country, on where do you see publications and left-wing movements and journalists within Africa engaging with and writing about rest of the world, and how do you see their engagement with publications in other parts of the world? And of course, that's an important question for the Wired International as part of our project as well. I think you're on mute, Sean, if you could unmute yourself.
I forgot about that, yeah. The short answer is, I think you sort of answered it for me. That is a central part of how Africa as a country thinks about itself, is that why is it that Westerners, or, and by this I mean kind of like very mainstream, kind of, milky toast type commentary, gets to talk about the rest of the world when they've just been there for like a week. But then, as you said, people from the global south or the former developing or third world, you can only talk about yourself. So one of the things I think that Africa as a country is trying to cultivate is for us to sort of, if something is happening in Latin America, in South America, in Central America, Caribbean, then we would like to also talk about it. And we would like to see what are the lessons, what are some of the things that we can pick up on that are useful to us. And one of the reasons we really like what the Wire is trying to do is the role of translation is actually for us like key. If we can put this work into other languages, then how Africans are experiencing something, other people can also get a sense of how we experience it. And two other quick points. One is, we think that Africa always, and it's unfortunate that people don't think about it in that way, we're often like ground zero for often like how capitalism gets implemented and how people experience like raw capitalism often, which later on it gets to the West, whether those things might be about the manipulation of elections, whether it might be the exploitation of labor. Like, you will see those things as ground zero in Africa. Similarly, you might see how people think as movements. Like a lot of the movements, the modern kind of political movements around self-determination, around political rights, like the most active and mass embedded trade union movements that you could think of, and people don't often, oh, well, it's Africa. No, like you might find that in South Africa, you might find it in Burkina Faso, oil workers in Nigeria. And so that's one of the things we always try to do, is to show like, yeah, this is particular to this particular African country, but we are trying to speak to the world. And so I think translation and being part of this community really will help in even doing that more, in like bringing our voice, which we've always insisted is not on the margin, but is a central part of how capitalism has developed, or how people have thought about how to make other kinds of worlds. And for me, I think that this is why I think the Wire for me is very useful.
Thank you, Sean. And absolutely, that connection with social movements is sort of central to the project of progressive journalism, right? And I want to ask Len this question: given kind of the increased repression in the Philippines, and you talked already about the many different constraints that journalists, both within Bulatlat and otherwise, operate under, how is it that you work with and relate to these different social movements? And perhaps even if there's been a very impactful or memorable story that you've covered personally or otherwise at the Bulatlat that you'd like to share with us.
Yes, from the beginning, Bulatlat has considered itself part of the movement for genuine change. When it was established in 2001, a few months after the ouster of then President Joseph Estrada, Bulatlat was born out of the need to provide space for these social movements, because in the Philippines, dominant media is controlled by the big business. So it was born out of the demand for from the farmers, workers, indigenous peoples, etc., to have a media outfit that can publish their struggles and their aspirations. So I think that's the one of the greatest strengths of Bulatlat for the past 20 years. We will celebrate our 20th year in February 2021. And the trust given to us by our readers, members of these social movements, keeps us inspired and going. That's really the only thing that makes us continue with our work despite all the limitations and all the risks that come with it. So we do not see ourselves as apart from the movement for genuine change. From the very beginning, we have been part of the movement for social justice. That's why our focus is on the people's movement and people's actions for the attainment of their rights and welfare.
Thank you, Len. And what you said is something that has been a theme that's come up in other speeches as well. Right? Miguel, for instance, talked about the Feminist Congress, which might not traditionally fit within the idea of someone doing beat reporting, but that's kind of the space that progressive journalism has always occupied. And so thank you so much, Len, for continuing to do the work that you do. And I want to turn to you, Miguel, to ask, you've mentioned a few different themes that were very clear in your mind when you started Contexto, but what are the types of stories as you look around the world today, not just within your region, that you think, what are the kind of stories that you think are undertold? What specific voices are being excluded from conversation, especially in the global mainstream media?
Well, as I said before, in the mainstream media in Spain are all controlled now by big companies and banks. So it's obvious the economic agenda and the political agenda is absolutely dominated by those enterprises. So we have to make a huge effort to try to explain and to try to be influent in the fact that economy needs to be changed, because we have had these last two crises together, and we are seeing inequality growing all the way in all the world, and we see the elites are not aware of that. So it's very important for us to make good stories on inequality, on poverty, on the housing problem, on the people who has no houses for living. I mean, we are all the time trying to make more and more stories on that issues, and as well about minorities and feminism and climate change. I mean, the agenda is clearly marked by the neoliberal think tanks, and we have to try to escape from that. And I hope the Wire is a huge opportunity for everybody who is taking part on it, of sharing those stories and sharing those pieces, and trying to make every day a greater number of people are given access to those informations. Of course, the mainstream social networks as well are dominated as well by the mainstream media, and Twitter has been favoring, and Facebook has been favoring the right-wing speeches and the hate speeches, and we have to fight. We have to fight very strong against that as well. So we can only do it if we are united. I mean, Contexto has 170,000 followers on Twitter, but if we are able to aggregate the whole bunch of people that are following the media, that are in the Wire, for instance, we are reaching millions of people. So I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, unions know this since the 19th century. with no internationalism, there is no possible fight. And that's I think that's more clear now than ever. I mean, we have to be united for that, and to fight united for that, and also to be able to find resources for that together, because I mean, journalism is not cheap. We can make activism. We have worked for free for a time pro bono, but we need to have resources to compete with the mainstream media. We have to have good audiovisual pieces, analysis pieces, graphic pieces. I mean, and that costs money. So we need to invent something to make our incomes greater as well. So I don't like to think as an enterpriser or as an executive, but I mean, we have to pay the roles, and we have to pay for journalism. I think that's a key thing. Sorry, perhaps I went too long.
Thank you. No, that was good. You've left us with not a very easy question, but hopefully we will figure out how to pay for journalism, the kind of journalism that we do want. I know we're almost to the end of time, but I have one last question for Dennis. You spoke so passionately about the many different issues that you've covered through all of your different platforms. And I want to ask, from Bolivia to Chile, we've seen some great victories for the left in Latin America in recent months. What's one emerging story from the region that you work in that you think the world should pay attention to?
Well, I would say that's number one story, although to be honest, it's actually quite hard to pick one, because there's just been such a incredibly inspiring succession of events that took place in Latin America over the last several weeks. But I would say that between the victory of movement towards socialism in Bolivia, and effectively the defeat of the military regime of Janine Áñez, the defeat of the military coup that took place there in November 2019, let's say this political culmination of the Chilean uprising, resulting in the victory in the referendum, with over 78% of the population voting to change the current constitution, which still bears the marks and bears the main policies of the Pinochet dictatorship, to the massive uprising that we are currently seeing in Peru. Between these three events, these three magnificent events, I honestly believe that what we saw in Bolivia has had the most impact. As this was not just another electoral victory for the progressives or for the left, but rather this has actually been the first time in modern history of Latin America whereby a military coup succeeded in installing a new authoritarian regime, where it seemed to have succeeded in starting to implement a new neoliberal program, so similar perhaps to the events of Chile of September 11, 1973, and the commencement of the dictatorship of Pinochet. But that process came to a halt with this massive political electoral victory that we saw there by movement towards socialism, by candidates Luisa Zacatecora and David Choquehuanca, under conditions which cannot be considered fair by any standards, as these 12 years have been, these last 12 months in Bolivia have been. There's been an atmosphere of political persecution, of political intimidation of mass activists, of trade union activists. There have been several massacres. Actually today marks 1 year anniversary of the massacres in Sencata, in El Alto, and Sacaba, and Cochabamba, where a total of 35 indigenous activists were massacred by the military regime. And on top of that, as I said, incredible mismanagement by the government of Jenny Nanias of the economy, and this incredible social and economic crisis that arose out of that. So this incredible perfect storm of violence, of instability, and of fear that's been generated by this U.S.-backed government. Despite all of this, Mass still managed to obtain a tremendous victory of 55% at the polls. And analyzing it, I believe that under any normal set of circumstances, Mass would have won with more than 2/3 of the vote. So the achievement of the Bolivian people, I believe, here shouldn't just be recognized, but I believe it gives a lot of inspiration for the social movements, for the revolutionary and socialist political organizations in Latin America, and I say across the world as well. As that it gives the kind of message that it sends is to continue to be unified in our ideas, in our project, to continue to mobilize our forces, and to continue to have faith in socialism and future. This is what President Allende's last words were. I have faith in Chile and its destiny. I believe we should be saying that we have faith in the working class and in socialism and the destiny of the earth as well.
That was really well said, Dennis. Thanks so much for that. And as you know, Progressive International has also had great joy in engaging with the Bolivian election, certainly the most important election of this year. And I don't think it's been, at least to me personally, it's been ever clearer the fact that progressive publications are so deeply embedded with social movements, and as Len said, are one and the same, and not operating in different circles. I want to thank you all today for participating in this panel. I think there's some very critical questions on who gets to write about whom, whose voices get to reach the center, who's get left behind in the periphery. These are critical questions and difficult ones that we hope, again, at all of your 4 publications with Bulatlat, Africa as a Country, at Contexto and El Ciudadano, but also together with the Wire International, that we can take on successfully as part of the broader internationalist project. I know Sean Jacobs unfortunately had to leave for something at his daughter's school, but I want to extend my gratitude to him as well for joining the panel. And once again, thank all 4 of you, especially Len and Dennis, who I know are joining very late in the evening, maybe night. So thank you again for making the time. It's been a pleasure having you guys.